Okay, welcome back to Senate Education. It's Wednesday, April 6th, 4:03 p.m. We're going to ask Ledge Council to start us off, if she'd be so kind, Ms. St. James, by sort of setting the table, if you will, on this issue.
Sure. Again, for the record, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Current state law, and I've lost the section, so we're in Chapter 11. Current state law requires school districts to have liability bonds for liability purposes for certain school district either officers or board members. And I believe there has been a request to update that language to reflect what's actually happening, the language or the type of bonds or the type of sureties that are being used, insurance coverage, if you will, that's being actually used. So because this occurs in Chapter 11, your H727 has all new language. And so the places where this bond language occurs are towards the very back. So the first place it occurs is in section 730, which starts on page 66 of chunk 1. And so section 730 is unified union school district board members, nomination and election and bond. And so if you remember, this section talks about how district board members are elected, and we're not going to go into any of that. If you jump to page 71, at the very end of this section, on page 71 of chunk 1, line 8, subsection C, bond. Before a newly elected board member enters upon the duties of office, the district shall ensure that the district's blanket bond covers the new member. I believe the suggestion you're going to get is updating that blanket bonds language to reflect what school districts are actually doing in this area. This requirement, or this bond concept, also occurs in section 735 on page 75. So that was for district board members. On page 75, you have district officers.
What line? Oh, starting
Page
on line 9.
On page 75.
Yep.
Officers. So if you jump to page 77, just 2 pages over.
Yep.
Again, the rest of that section talks about the moderator and the treasurer and the clerk and whether they can be appointed or elected. If you jump to the end of that section, it's the same bond concept on line 7. Bond. The district shall ensure that its blanket bond covers a newly elected or appointed treasurer before the treasurer enters upon the duties of the office. And then these 2 provisions, the blanket bond requirement coverage for board members and the blanket bond requirement for the district treasurer, also appear in the unified or the union elementary and union high school sections. So those are sections 748 and 753. So these sections that we just talked about are for the unified union school districts. And then remember, there's the whole separate section for union elementary and union high school districts with the same concepts. So the bond language appears again in those sections. Do you want to look at those specifically? Okay.
Yeah, Senator Persnick.
Next question about, is there a difference in why we use the term bond, surety, and non-insurance?
I think that is, if you have witnesses now,
We do.
I think that was what they are hoping to raise with you.
And this is looking at just on page 71, so that the blanket bond covers the newly elected board member.
Correct.
So what does it mean to cover a board member?
For their action.
For their, so it's basically, if some action were taken by the board member, just help me understand this a little bit.
So I think what would be really helpful is the proposed language,
Okay.
which uses the term, just pull it up here,
It's in the bill.
crime insurance policy.
Crime.
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 So that is the language that's being suggested, that in lieu of a blanket bond, the district could also use a crime insurance policy to cover their liability for the actions of the board member. I believe the witnesses that I believe you have lined up that are suggesting this language change would be the best to hear from why that language change is important to them.
We're enjoying the conversation with you, but yes, I'm afraid we, no offense to the witnesses, but yes, I think we do need to pivot to them. Ms. Zaglowski, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Zaglowski, Vermont School Boards Association Executive Director. And with me today are Ken Canning from Vermont School Boards Insurance Trust. He's the multi-line program manager. And also Chris Boyle, who's an attorney that works with VSBIT. And if it's okay with you, Chair Campion, I think it would be helpful to have Mr. Canning explain he'd probably be able to answer the question that was just asked and also explain the reason for the requested change.
Terrific. Thank you. Welcome,
Thank
Mr. Canning.
Hello, good afternoon. Yes, my name is Ken Canning. I'm the multi-line program manager here at VSBIT. So yes, I'll speak to why we are making this request this afternoon, and Attorney Boyle will speak to the exact language that we're suggesting. So for those of you who don't know, VSBIT is an intermunicipal insurance association owned and governed by its members. And currently over 90% of Vermont's pre-K through 12 public schools are members of VSBIT. We've been serving Vermont school communities for over 35 years, offering cost-effective and innovative risk management services. A multi-line program offers the comprehensive property and casualty insurance coverages, claims management, and proactive risk management solutions. We also have a school management resource center, which offers support for physical plant management, human resources, and policy development. And finally, we have an unemployment insurance program that helps members manage their unemployment benefit exposure. So the topic for today, bonds or crime coverage. So today, most supervisory unions and districts satisfy that statutory bond requirement by purchasing crime coverage. Modern crime coverage policies include a lot of different coverages, but the two key coverages relevant to this discussion are employee theft and faithful performance. So employee theft, that covers the insured supervisory union school district for losses caused by theft or forgery committed by an employee, whether that employee is identified or not, acting alone or in collusion with other persons. Faithful performance coverage pays for losses caused by the failure of any employee to faithfully perform their duties as prescribed by law. In our coverage, employee the definition is expanded to include treasurer, tax collector, and other public officials. So in the past, bonds were required to ensure that faithful performance of certain employees and public officials. Bonds are still available today, but it's far more common for entities to purchase crime coverage. So we believe it's appropriate to modernize the Vermont statute to match current practice and allow school districts the option of purchasing crime coverage in lieu of a bond, if they so desire. We're not asking for bonding requirement to be removed, only that the statutes be amended to include the additional option of purchasing crime coverage. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Otherwise, we'll turn it over to Attorney Boyle to speak to our suggested language.
Committee, any questions on this? Senator Booker.
Mr. Canning, can you define crime coverage as opposed to bond coverage?
Okay, sure. Yeah, great question. So basically the difference is crime coverage is purchased by the school district or supervisory union. And it's first party coverage, they're the insured. So if an employee or an elected official commits theft or does not faithfully perform their duties and causes a loss to the entity, the insurance company will reimburse the insured entity, the school district. On the other hand, bond coverage, if you require a bond of an elected official or employee, the onus is on that person to go out and purchase a bond and present it to the district. And if that person were to, again, commit theft or not perform their duties faithfully and cause a loss, the school district would have to file a claim against that surety bond and deal with that insurance company and hopefully get our reimbursement. So that's the big difference. It's who has control of the contractual relationship and how easy it might be to recover, and who's in charge of setting the limits of coverage that they want and paying for that coverage and making sure it is readily available and suitable to their needs. So that's the main difference. Does that help answer your question?
Thank you.
Senator Pershler.
Is there a difference between crime insurance policy and like a general liability policy that like boards that I'm on, there's like board of directors liability insurance? Is it the same as that and just got a different name, or is this specific crime, only for crime?
Right. That's another very good question. Yeah, they're very different coverages. So the difference is this crime coverage, we call it first party coverage, where the relationship is between the insured who purchases the policy and the insurance company who will pay in the case of a claim. And if there is a theft or a loss due to faithful performance, the insurance company will directly pay the insured who suffered the loss. Liability coverage is what we call third party. So you're introducing a third party into the equation where whatever board you are serving on or the school board, if they are sued by another party, the insurance company or VISBIT would come to your defense, defend you against that third party. And if you're approved negligent and liable, the insurance company would pay that third party on your behalf. So liability gives you protection for whatever you may be sued for, and this crime coverage is very specific to theft and faithful performance.
And it's faithful performance, even though that's not a crime, but that's just, even though it's called a crime policy, faithful performance is part of it.
Yes, right. And what it does, the reason it's in the crime policy is because it is still a direct loss to the insured, either money, securities, or other property that is caused by an employee not performing faithfully, and it's still the loss is suffered by the insured. Whereas liability, the loss is suffered by a third party that believes the school is or the board is responsible for their injuries or damage.
And do the school boards have or need liability insurance, or is it because they're a public entity, you can't sue them or something like that?
Oh, no, they absolutely do need it, and they do have it. That's part of the comprehensive property and casualty offerings of VISBIT. We provide, a general liability and school board legal liability, as well as property, automobile, workers' compensation coverages to our members.
But it's not part of the legislation required, or it is somewhere else and we're just not dealing with that because we're just focusing on this bond word.
Right. To my understanding, liability coverage is not required by statute. As far as I know, workers' compensation coverage, that's required of all employers. Automobile insurance is required of anyone who owns a vehicle. Those are the only two coverages I'm aware of that are required by law. And then this bonding requirement here would be the third one. Otherwise, property and liability, it's a smart idea to have it, but you could be self-insured. But like you said, it's probably smarter to purchase some coverage from an intermunicipal association such as VISBIT. For cities and towns, it's the Vermont League of Cities and Towns passive program, or commercial insurers can provide it for other entities.
Thank you.
Mr. Boyle.
Right.
Thank you all. So with Ken having sort of teed it up so nicely, my piece of this is pretty easy. I had submitted some redline changes. I don't know if you have those all accessible to you.
We do.
Okay, so it's pretty easy to see. I mean, the change is just inserting what's effectively the same and/or language in each of those 4 provisions to, just as Ken said, create the option for a school to maintain a bond if it wants to, or maintain insurance in the form that Ken just described, which reflects the reality of what most schools are doing these days.
Senator Purcell.
My only question is, maybe if you were going to get to this, there's 2 documents that you submitted. One has a longer, different change to 16 VSA 492. That's more like in lieu of taking a bond, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, so the 16 VSA 492, that moves from chapter 11 over to chapter 9. And the language in the chapter 9 section is slightly different than the proposed language in H727. And that's the reason for the proposed language being slightly different with respect to 16 VSA 492. But the goal is the same. It's just to create that option for a school to maintain insurance in the form that Ken described in lieu of the bond.
Yeah.
And so I'm not familiar with a collector. Maybe I should be. There's schools have collectors. Is that kind of like delinquent tax clusters that towns have? What is the position of collector?
I am also not familiar with a collector. Maybe
Is that a quote in there?
Maybe Sue.
Ms. Siglowski?
I'm thinking it may refer to the tax collector.
But this part of the statute is all about school boards, but then we're talking about the town, or is this about town treasurer and town collector?
Towns usually collect taxes.
So,
Yeah.
Please,
So
Mr. Boyle.
the 16 VSA 492 language is from chapter 9 addressing school districts. So that was why I took the liberty of, just sort of keeping collector in the list of folks who are included there. But I see your point that, perhaps there's some value in identifying exactly what that person does.
I'm looking to Ms. St. James. Does this make sense to you to have that in there?
Sure. So the language in chapter 9 about bonds occurs only in subchapter 2, which is related to incorporated school districts. And the collector, there's a whole separate statute for what the collector does, and it is the collector of taxes. And it just says the district may elect the collector of town taxes to be the collector of taxes for the district, although he or she is not an inhabitant of that district. And when a collector accepts that office, he or she shall do so in writing, and the acceptance shall be recorded by the clerk. So that describes what the collector of taxes does.
It's actually selected by the school board?
Do with it.
The district may elect the collector of town taxes to be the collector of taxes for the district.
So the town may do this.
No.
No, the district
May,
elects the same person
yeah,
who collects the taxes for the town
okay,
to also collect them for the district,
okay,
even if that person is not a resident of the district.
yeah.
But could they, so you're saying that the statute says that the district could select somebody else? They could select township than to go collect taxes.
In a different town.
It says may not shall.
Okay.
Okay, so they could choose it,
It's,
but nobody does it.
I don't know what anyone does. But that's who the collector of taxes is.
Right, I understand it for the town
Mhm.
Yeah.
in the treasurer role, but I just didn't know there was a connection to the school districts, even though the collector is collecting property taxes, which go to the education. But
Yeah. Senator.
I don't know if you made this point, but the towns collect the money that then goes to the ed fund, right? We're clear on that.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, I'm clear on that. Are you clear?
yeah. I think so.
But the district doesn't elect the tax collector.
Right.
But they can. Maybe they just
Well,
always
there-
automatically collect the same, appoint the same person.
They can't elect a person, they can use the same one, correct?
Well,
No,
Maybe like an unincorporated town, maybe they need that ability. We have
These are
unincorporated.
school districts.
Okay. But like those
Yeah.
white lots. The unincorporated parts
Yeah.
of Vermont with no town
Oh,
government.
yeah, the Gores.
Right, right.
Collectors.
The work.
That's true.
Senator Hooker.
I'm just confused. I didn't know that you could collect education taxes
And the
separately.
Right.
So. I don't
Yes,
know
help
how
us
that
out here,
fits
Ms.
in.
Safety. And if you think we should also hear from, from a tax attorney or someone, please let me know.
I mean,
I think it just depends on what your goal here is. The proposal is
We
to
just wanna get
update
the
language to
Yeah.
reflect what districts are actually doing. If you want to go
And this is
further,
what districts are actually doing with this
I think
language.
that's the testimony you just heard. If you
Yeah.
want to go further into what is a collector of taxes and what does that person do?
I'm looking to Senator personally.
no, I
We'll amend
apologize.
it, we'll likely amend it on third reading, but
Yeah,
for
on the
now.
floor. I apologize for bringing it up, because it is an existing statute. I thought maybe it was just, I saw it in the red, so I thought it was new, but it is an A above as well, so.
And, yeah, I didn't realize that we did refer to the person as the collector.
And actually, Mr.
Right,
Kenny,
that kind of threw me a little bit also, the collector.
Could be antiques.
Could be a lot of things. Yeah. So I think generally, I'm reading the room. I think we're gonna be okay on this, Ms. Siglowski. Knocked it out of the park.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Yeah. So what we'll do, Ms. Siglowski, and thank you in all seriousness for bringing it forward. We're hearing, as you probably know, and I believe you may be in also later this week on Friday, to generally weigh in on the entire bill, where the withdrawals, et cetera. And so we will get this language, we'll ask Daphne to make sure that the witnesses coming in that day see this language beforehand as well.
Excellent. Thank
Okay.
you.
Anything
Good.
else
Thank
from
you for your
you,
time.
Mr. Canning or Mr. Boyle?
No, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Nothing from me. Thank you for the opportunity. It really was a pleasure.
Great, thank you all. Thank you. Okay, why don't we,
Can I take off?
yeah,
see ya.
Yeah.
close the screen.